And when we see many people in news organizations remain neutral about the basic absurdity of these claims and actions, we are deeply disappointed. More than anything, we're worried, quite naturally, given the twists and turns of history, about where these actions and sentiments could eventually lead. Now, this is no intellectual exercise for us. For many Jewish people, it's like a matter of survival, informed once again by history. In this case, very personal history to me. Take the story of my own family. My grandfather came to Ellis Island at a very young age from Eastern Europe, without an education, without a penny to his name. He was a street urchin, stealing apples from the push carts just to survive. But he dreamt of a brighter future for himself and his family. My grandfather ended up with the paper workers in Utica, New York, and helped form the union there. But he lost his job in the lead up to World War II, so he came back to New York City and bought a little exterminating business. His son, my father, followed in his footsteps and eventually took over that exterminating business. My father struggled in that job, barely making ends meet. But together with my mom, he provided a stable and loving home in Brooklyn for my siblings and me, where we were able to flourish. And because of the tolerance and the openness and the opportunity that courses through all of American life, I now stand before you as the majority leader of the United States Senate, the highest elected office a Jewish person has ever attained in the history of this country. Only in America could an exterminator's son grow up to be the first Jewish party leader in the Senate. But it must be said also, this is not the norm in the grand and long scheme of Jewish history. While my grandfather came to America and encountered opportunity, many of his siblings, cousins, aunts, and uncles, and other family members remained behind in Eastern Europe. When I was still a young boy, I was told why many branches of our family tree stopped growing forever. In 1941, when the Nazis invaded Ukraine, then part of Galicia, they asked my great-grandmother, the matriarch of the family, the wife of a locally revered rabbi, to gather her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren on the porch of her home, which was located in the town square. As more than 30 people gathered on the porch, aged 85 to 3 months, the Nazis forced the remaining Jewish citizens of the town to gather in the town square and watch. When the Nazis told my great-grandmother, "You are coming with us," she refused. And they machine-gunned down every last one of them.
Wow.
The babies, the elderly, everybody in between. This story resonated deeply in my heart when I first started learning the details of the October 7th massacre in Israel. I was in China with a bipartisan delegation of my fellow senators, trying to get President Xi Jinping to open up Chinese markets to American companies and stop the flow of fentanyl across our borders. As the horrors of October 7th started coming into focus, the Israeli ambassador to China shared with me the story of what she heard had just happened in one of the kibbutzim called Be'eri. Hamas terrorists entered the kibbutz on October 7th and killed more than 120 Jewish residents, from the elderly to the babies. Sadly, it was not the first time I heard of such evil being committed against the Jewish people. Most, if not all, Jewish Americans know stories similar to that of my
A strong speech here by Chuck Schumer.
Remarkable.
Yeah, emotional and personal. I think the one line that sticks out to me, Dana, is that line at the beginning, in many ways we feel alone. He's talking about Jewish Americans who've been watching these protests on campus and in various cities across the country. You can get more later tonight in the heart of New York City, too.
He also was explaining that non-Jewish communities may not understand how alone they feel.
Nikki Haley joins us now, Republican presidential candidate. Thanks for being patient with us. We just wanted to get the message there from Chuck Schumer. Good morning and welcome back here.
Morning.
Got a number of things to get through, but just a quick comment on this. We talked to Sabrina Singh from the Pentagon last hour. We asked her, is the full-fledged, full-throated support of President Biden still intact with regard to Israel going after Hamas? And she said, yes, nothing has changed. Do you see it the same way?
You know, it's interesting, and I appreciate the senator's speech. I think it's important for people to hear about it. But let's look at a few things about what's happening with anti-Semitism and then get into what's happening with Israel. First of all, let's stop talking about the dangers of anti-Semitism and do something about it. You have foreign money going into universities right now from Arab countries and Chinese countries. Don't be surprised that we have pro-Hamas protests on our campuses when that foreign money is going in there. Let's get the foreign money out of our universities. The second thing is, look at all of the foreign bots on social media spreading disinformation, spreading pro-Hamas messaging, spreading anti-Semitism. There's a reason India banned TikTok. There's a reason Nepal banned TikTok. It's because it was causing social disruption. Our social media companies need to get rid of foreign bots that are on social media and show us the algorithm so that we can get all of that out. And then thirdly, let's go to our president. When you talk about what the press secretary said about Israel, the president is the one that refused to put anti-Zionism into the definition of anti-Semitism. Anybody that thinks Israel doesn't have the right to exist, that is just as bad as if the KKK was out here spewing hate. That hate is exactly the same as anti-Semitism. He needs to fix the definition and hold everybody to that standard. But more than that, Biden has gone and said he supports Israel. You don't put conditions on your friends. He should be putting conditions on Hamas. He's treating Hamas and Israel the same. Let Israel do what they need to do. They want to save those hostages as much as anyone.
No doubt.
And all Biden has done from the beginning of this is put conditions on Israel.
Okay, on that, 47 days to Iowa. Ron DeSantis is coming after you. He's going to pull the full Grassley on Saturday.
And what she just said was the truth. And to me, it's almost leaning towards the fact that Biden himself is anti-Christian or anti-Jew, because he is leaning more towards putting restrictions on the Jewish people than he is the people that actually started the fight to begin with.
Americans for Prosperity, the most conservative grassroots organization in the country, come out and endorse me because they like my economic plans and my plans for the future of America. You know, I think he's saying what he has to say because he's grasping at this point, but we're staying focused. Our goal is to win the support of every Iowan, every Granite Stater, every South Carolinian, and every American. We're going to keep on working harder than everybody else and keep working smarter than everybody else because we have a country to save.
There's more of that.
So you have a couple of other competitors, right? And so Donald Trump is one of them, and his spokesperson said this, that Americans for Prosperity has already lit millions of dollars on fire this primary, only to watch President Donald Trump's lead grow. No amount of money can break the bond President Trump has with voters. He kept his promises. And Chris Christie said about you that she should either run against Trump or don't run against Trump. If you're running for second place, tell everyone you're running for second place. I know that you're not running for second place. That's what you say. How do you respond to two of these competitors who think that you are not the one to take on Trump mano a mano?
I don't play for second. I never have. I'm not going to do it now. You know, we are now in second place in Iowa, second place in New Hampshire, and second place in South Carolina. We've got one more fella to catch up to, and the momentum is growing. We can feel it on the ground here in New Hampshire. We can feel it in Iowa, and we're going to keep working. I think, look, President Trump would have loved to have AFP's endorsement. Everybody wants the largest conservative grassroots organization in America. That's millions of people on the ground in all of the early states that want to see a change in our country. And so I think President Trump would have loved to have that endorsement. I think with Chris Christie saying that, I am running against President Trump. I'm waiting for him to get on a debate stage. He can't keep hiding the way he's hiding. He can't start acting like President Biden. He needs to get on the debate stage. He needs to confront us. He needs to let us, talk about the differences and go forward. But the truth is, you have to face facts. I think President Trump was the right president at the right time. I agree with a lot of his policies. But the truth of everything is, rightly or wrongly, chaos follows him. Chaos follows him. Everybody knows that. And with our country divided and the world on fire, we
Governor,
can't live in chaos anymore.
Like that. It does seem that enough Republicans like that. If he's 40 points ahead in some of these polls, then maybe the chaos was okay for those voters, at least in the primary.
On the ground, nobody wants the chaos. And I'll tell you, I think everybody looks at national polls. You need to look at the polls in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. They're the ones that are getting ready for an election. They go to vote in less than 50 days. They don't want chaos. They want action. And they look at the fact that we've got to get this country back on track, and they're ready to see a new generational leader do that. And I'm going to do that for them.
Wish we had more time, so coming back soon, okay?
Yes.
We're out of time for now, but thank you again,
Thank
Nikki
you.
Haley, for being here.
Thanks. Go to NikkiHaley.com.
We just want our hostages back. Give us our 200 hostages.
So a government lawyer mocking pleas for the return of Israeli hostages as the Biden administration struggles under internal opposition to Israel policy. Martha's here in a moment. She'll join us to discuss that and more. Stay tuned.
You know, there's so many different media outlets now that in and of itself is what's causing chaos, because you have one contradicting the other one while the other one supports the other one, and
comes after a State Department internal
and it just turns into a it turns into the author of confusion that even the Bible talks about Satan being the author of.
President Biden's support for Israel sparked government-wide criticism of the president and Secretary of State. Blinken ended up penning a letter to the entire department, and the spokesman, Matt Miller, says this.
He did address in that email all the issues underlying our policy and made clear people understood what our policy is. We think that the diversity inside the department is actually a strength, not a weakness.
So we have known for a while, Dana, there was fierce opposition to the Israel policy among the diplomatic corps.
How can anybody say that knowing that we're $33 trillion in debt and all this division, and we can't even agree on one thing, much less all the things? How can anybody get up there and say that?
Corps, even at the White House. Now we know it is seeping into the intelligence community and Veterans Affairs as well. Dana?
Okay, Jillian Turner, thank you for the update.
So more of this with Martha McCallum. Morning to you.
Hey guys, how are you doing?
We're doing well. Thank you very much. I don't know who does that. Who says, I want to pull out my phone and record me making fun of these people who've lost their family members? I guess that's one point to be made. The second question is this. You can go back decades. You can go back centuries. There's plenty of things to protest in the Middle East. You know, if you feel you've been aggrieved, go ahead and take to the streets. We've seen it over and over again. But is this the issue you want to fight over? After you saw the video of the raping of women and the killing of families and the burning of bodies, is this really what you want to do?
This is so appalling, and it makes me ashamed, honestly. I mean, these are the people who are working in our veterans agencies. This is a military agency of the United States. We have people on 15 bases in the Middle East who are serving right now. More than 74 attacks have been hurled in their direction. And Shakeba Murad, an appellate attorney for the Office of the General Counsel for the Department of Veterans Affairs, is mocking American hostages. We have 8 or 9 people in this group. We have 30 Americans who were killed. The level of immaturity is so astute here. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do. If this woman worked in my agency and did this, she would be fired on the spot. This is so appalling. Now, as far as the CIA members and the State Department members, can you imagine what the intelligence agencies in China and Russia think when they look at this divisiveness? Now, there's something called, you know, when you have an argument within your family, right? You keep it inside, okay? There's no problem with them writing a letter, them asking for a meeting, which they did at the White House, people who dispute this policy. I understand that. I think that's a mature course of action if you want your feelings to be known. This on social media, this is a generation. These are young people from those who were raised in this, right? This environment of being able to, wanting to share their feelings everywhere at all times. This is hugely destructive, and it's a national security problem.
On that point, you're only going to see more of it.
Yeah.
In the months and years to come. It's not going to go away.
Well, also just remember, so she's a lawyer, right? So she had come from law school, and we've seen a lot of these universities have similar outcomes. So again, it's the fruit of the anti-Semitism. And Senator Chuck Schumer gave a very moving speech at 10 o'clock. And he said, non-Jewish communities might not realize how we feel right now. And we feel alone and vulnerable. And that's striking. And I think here at Fox News, like, we've been really good about pointing that out and giving people a voice to it.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I thought his speech was very moving as well. And there's one section where he talked about, you know, many of us, he's talking about the people who are speaking out against Israel, right? We march together, he said, for our black and brown brothers. We march together for all of these other causes that we believe in terms of tolerance and humanity and how we treat each other. And now, he said, we feel completely alienated by the same people that we march with for these causes. And I can't help thinking what that does politically down the road.
Imagine when you feel like you're eating alone at the lunch table, like, for the rest of your life. Like,
absolutely.
That's how it feels.
Yeah.
We'll see you on the story.
All right, guys.
Wanna
Thank
come?
you. Good to see you as always.
Okay,
Thanks,
We'll
Mark.
see you there. Okay.
Well, just in time for Christmas, an ultra-rare babe.
Let's go forward right here. I don't know nothing about all this. It's not really none of my concern. Let's jump through this real quick. Let's go right to here.
Well, Harris, I can tell you that that mother that you just heard from is not alone. 140, actually over 140 hostages remain in Gaza. And Israel reportedly has a list of 12 hostages that are set to be freed in a sixth consecutive exchange tonight. We are waiting on those hostages to be transferred over to the Red Cross, but reportedly in this list, it includes 10 Israeli women, as well as 2 women who hold dual citizenship in Israel and Russia. This is believed to be a gesture by Hamas to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Remains to be seen if any Americans are included in this newest batch of hostages that are set to be freed, but it comes after a fifth exchange last night. Take a look at this video. This group included 9 Israeli women as old as 84 and 1 Israeli girl, a 17-year-old who was released in exchange for 30 Hamas prisoners. 2 foreign workers were also released from Gaza. A doctor at the Sheba Medical Center said some of the hostages had injuries, but they were all in stable condition. We have new video of an Israeli-Russian man reuniting with his family. Take a look at this. Hamas is mainly releasing women and children, but this was also considered another gesture to Putin. Meanwhile, 2 more U.S. military flights are set to land in Egypt this week for a total of 3 flights carrying humanitarian aid bound for Gaza. U.S. officials are again in Qatar today working to extend the temporary ceasefire to secure the release of more hostages and the delivery of more aid into Gaza. But as negotiations play out, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu applied more pressure on Hamas with this message moments ago.
There is no way we are not going back to fighting until the end. This is my policy. The entire cabinet stands behind it. The entire government stands behind it. The soldiers stand behind it. The people stand behind it. This is exactly what we will do.
Harris, tonight an Israeli official says the only way that Israel will agree to a longer pause in the fighting is if all women and children are released from Gaza. We'll see if that's a negotiating position or if that in fact holds true. Negotiations are also including talks about possibly releasing Israeli men, even IDF soldiers. So far, Israel has had to release 3 Palestinian prisoners for every Israeli woman or child hostage. We'll send it back to you, Harris.
Well, I had mentioned where you are, and I don't know how close you are to the border with Lebanon, but there was a point early in the war where there was, a lot of concern about the rockets that were coming over into northern Israel. Is that still a problem?
Well, Harris, yesterday, Lebanese media reported that an Israeli shell landed in southern Lebanon. We didn't see any further escalation. The IDF wouldn't comment on it. They didn't confirm that in fact happened. But the IDF chief of staff did visit northern Israel yesterday. And where we are, Harris, we're very close to the border. This village has been evacuated. The IDF chief said that when people come back to this village and others like it, they will have a much improved security situation compared to what they had on October 7th.
Yeah, you're talking about securing an area that potentially could become a second front of the war, and all that they're doing to keep that from happening, and it has quieted it at least a little bit. Nate Foy, great reporting as always. Thank you very much. Lieutenant Colonel Darren Gobb now, Army veteran and Black Hawk helicopter pilot, also co-founder and executive director of Restore Liberty. Great to have you and all of your expertise every time we can get you. You know, Colonel, as you hear about these hostage releases, the one thing that pops to my mind from Nate's reporting, outside of the good news of the people who are being released, are the two gestures that Hamas has made to Putin of Russia, with two of the hostages released. One who's a man, and I guess holding dual citizenship with Russia. What is the point of that with terrorists?
Yeah, Harris, thank you, and it's always good to join you. But every time I see something happen around Israel with either Hamas or even Hezbollah and the Houthi rebels, and if you were to tug on that thread a little bit, you're going to find that thread running through Tehran and ultimately back in some way to Moscow. So this is really kind of an acknowledgement of the fact that Putin and Moscow, working with Tehran and other allies, are all involved in this. And this is just an acknowledgement of that fact that I think many of us know, but it's a change of it. It changes a little bit when you see that acknowledgement through their actions.
Yeah, I mean, we know that the hostages were taken as human shields and now pawns in politics that perhaps we're not focused on with regard to Russia.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's one of the risks with this conflict in general is we're so focused on Israel that we forget that there's still, things going on in Ukraine, and there are these ties that are across in this geopolitical spectrum between Russia, Iran, Russia, and China, and many other things that we still have to keep our eye on in the U.S. And we can't forget that in the midst of all this. But like you said, too, we also need to make sure that we do celebrate the reunion of these families at the same time.
Yeah, this has been hard, though, because there's so much propaganda around all of this. I mean, the delays early on, delay. Well, okay, I guess we'll give this list, we'll give that list. I mean, there was a time when Jews were being put on lists during the Holocaust. And when I hear those words, who's on the list, it always shakes my soul. I know this is for a good purpose, but the fact that we're waiting for a list to come out is also disturbing. Hamas, they seem to be professional at this.
Well, they are professional at this, and they've been at this for many decades. In fact, one of their guiding principles is that war is deceit. So anytime that they're doing something, including treaties, hostage exchanges, and things like that, they're doing it for their own strategic advantage. They're not ever going to do it for humanitarian purposes or actual care for the people that they live amongst. So that is something we have to account for. We may not like it, but it's a fact of life when you're part of an organization that is a terrorist group that is raised this way.
I want to talk with you about something that popped. The City Council of Oakland, California voted unanimously on a resolution for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, while also rejecting a proposal to formally condemn Hamas terrorists. The event attracted dueling rallies, no violence, thankfully. Inside the meeting, one speaker compared Israel to a wife beater who complains when the wife fights back. Others described Israel as genocidal, colonial. Watch this.
Condemning Hamas without condemning the apartheid state of Israel is basically encouraging genocide.
We could have easily put forth a resolution condemning the countless crimes committed by the Zionist entity.
Your reaction?
Well, first of all, my reaction is I think Oakland has plenty of problems that they need to address within their own city, and this is not a concern of theirs ultimately, along with those other cities that are doing this. Fortunately, these resolutions have absolutely no merit when it comes to dictating any actions by Israel in the first place. So Israel needs to keep fighting along the public relations war, but they need to win the bigger war first, which is the eradication of Hamas. That's the only ceasefire they should accept, is when they should stop fighting when Hamas has been eliminated, and they need to stay focused on that. These kinds of resolutions in cities around the U.S. are truly exposing the radicalization of the left wing and others not only in campuses, but now we're seeing them in city councils and county governments around the United States. And that's unfortunate to see. We shouldn't be restricting their speech in any way, shape, or form. But I don't see this as being any way productive towards Israel or even those who would be suffering during this attack on Gaza that Israel has the right to conduct in the first place.
Yeah, and you have fought for this country and fought for that right for free speech. And at the same time, I continue to ask, they talk so much about hating Israel. They don't talk about loving the people that they say they want to help, the Palestinians. And I don't understand how any of what they're doing is helping them. Colonel, thank you very much. The far left squad's general unity over the Israel-Hamas war seems to be crumbling a bit. This is among the Democrats, a split among the very members over whether Israel even has the right to exist. You just heard the Colonel say, this rhetoric, these feelings, aren't just on college campuses. Plus, more evidence voters are feeling very down on President Biden's handling of the biggest, most important issues facing Americans, and they're worried, big worries, from Team Biden now over key voting blocks that used to be a sure thing.
This demographic is so largely disappointed with the job that President Biden has done, regardless of political affiliation. I mean, from his age to his deprioritization of the issues that matter most to Gen Z. I think people are just so disengaged with the Biden campaign.
With various countries from Russia to China that do not have the U.S.'s worldview. And so we need as many allies as we possibly can. So I think standing for Israel is in the U.S.'s interest, not only because their values are so similar to ours, but it's also in our strategic interest to do so.
Yeah.
It's not in necessarily America's interest in standing up for the righteous or the godly, even though I know that the people over in Israel, Jerusalem, has probably just as many quirks and just as many problems and just as many iotas as everybody else does. But the fact of the matter is, whenever you have a society that's now standing up for unrighteous more than righteousness, then you are teeter-tottering. I want you to be careful in how you listen to this. Then you have a worldly global society that is teeter-tottering on seeing the manifestations of wrath coming from the heavenly kingdom, and not just the heavenly kingdom basically turning its back on society to the degree of watching Satan come down in great wrath, as the Bible predicts that has been going on now for quite some time. But I'm talking about the actual wrath of God that the world has not seen in a great many years. Ever since basically Sodom and Gomorrah got destroyed and the old world got destroyed of a flood, we are hinging on opening up and seeing the very manifestations that the Bible talks about in Revelations and in the latter part of Daniel coming true because of the world leaning more towards evil than they are towards godly and righteousness. So it's not just an American thing. It's not just a Jewish thing. It is a Gentile thing, because the Bible is very clear in stating that until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled, that all these things must also be fulfilled. The Christian Gentiles, the true Christian Gentiles, has not yet been fulfilled in their dominance in basically seeing the meek inherit the earth. A matter of fact, if anything, because of the resistance movement that began right here in Northwest Tennessee 30 plus years ago, it was the Christian Gentiles. And the reason why that you're a Gentile is because of and through the Lord Jesus Christ, not because you're an American Gentile or a Russian Gentile or a Jewish Gentile or a Canadian Gentile, but you are a Gentile through the teachings and through the acceptances of the Lord Jesus Christ. No other ifs, ands, buts about it, which makes us, the Gentiles, just as capable and just as worthy of going before the throne room of God as the original Jew. But when you have a society that is leaning more towards the ungodly than you are the godly, then you have a society that is fixing to get slapped in the face by God Almighty. And whenever that happens, it'll make all these other individual bad events look like kindergarten's played, because whenever God gets ready to put the whammy down, I guarantee you there will not be no differential debate on who done it and why he done it. You got people like me that's trying to clear the air. You got people like myself that's trying to bring clarity in what's happening on a global, universal scale, and not necessarily a town or a city or a state or a country. But you have people like me that's trying to give an insight towards where we are and where we shouldn't be and where we need to go. And if the people continue to ignore individuals such as myself, well, then get ready to see the inedible happen. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. It's as if the devils are working through the human race that are basically causing the humans to shake their fist in the face of God, saying, I dare you, I dare you, I dare you. Well, if you dare God enough times, I guarantee you, he'll fulfill your dare. If you continue to be hard-headed with God, he'll give you over to a reprobate mind, just like the Bible talks about, and let you believe a lie to be damned. And don't think for a second that he won't do this, because it's part of the tough love strategy that he used on not only generations before us, but is willing to do again today. And that's the part that really concerns me.
I don't know if you caught earlier this hour, but Hamas is flexing to Russia by releasing 2 dual citizens of Israeli and Russian descent.
Hamas is doing everything within their reach to be able to use all of this for their purpose and for their movement, in basically being a antichrist movement versus a Christ movement. Good versus evil, evil versus good.
This so that we know that it exists.
Yes, and your disgust is appropriate, but it's important for us to see it, because otherwise it's literally unbelievable that you've got adult individuals in the United States, but it shows you the depth when we talk about pathologies.
And I've heard that now probably over a dozen times of people saying, well, this is unbelievable, this is unbelievable. Quit saying it's unbelievable whenever it is believable. It's actually occurring. This is the reality that we're living in right now. So quit saying it's unbelievable, because it is believable, because it was predicted for it to happen, pertaining to a great falling away. Now, we're at the crossroads. We have 2 choices. We can either continue to go towards the dark side, or we can lean towards going back towards the side of the light, pertaining to the godly, righteous side. There is no ifs and ands about this. It is not complicated. It's always been either yay or nay. That's what the Bible says. It's mankind that's made it so complex. It's the human race that's made it so complex. It's the demons within the human race that has made it so complex, because the Bible explicitly says that it is the author of confusion that is out to kill, steal, and destroy. Destroy what? Not just itself, but destroy humanity. And that's the direction that we're heading in if we don't retaliate and go in the godly, righteous trajectory.
illness. And the degree of what happens when you're indoctrinated, when you're manipulated with lies, and that's all you hear. The human mind is fragile. And this is why Jew hatred and the attack on general populations around the world for millennia has been possible, because of the nature of humanity, of the human condition, of the fragility of the human mind. What we have now in America and around the world, it can be used for bad, like social media, or it allows us to see that, have our conversation, remind people of what this means, what this is, and who we're trying to argue with. You can't make ceasefires with people who think that way. If you can't win an argument with people who think that way, it's something very different. So you just must move forward on what is right, what is normal, a value of celebrating human life and decency, and that is what has got to prevail, because that's the majority of people who believe that.
And each of those people, Kayleigh, they deserve their own assessment, their own analysis of the frankly vile commentary that they were spewing forth. We don't have time, unfortunately, to do it, but when you take it in the aggregate, I mean, they complaining about Hamas? You mean reporting about child beheadings? You mean expressing condemnation against terrorist organizations?
Absolutely.
Fabricating? Again, reporting? Old white men? No, the world is shocked. The world condemns this behavior and expresses solidarity with an entire people that others have expressed as their complete goal to eradicate. And yet there they stand with their self-righteousness lecturing us.
Right. We have a morality problem in this country, and you watch that, and that's the only takeaway. Look, your antennas might have gone up when there were people in the country who said, I want to put pornography in front of kindergartners. Mm-hmm. Your antennas went up when there were people in this country who said, I want to kill a child, a fully formed human child, abortion until birth. Your antennas kind of went up. But I maintain that what we are seeing with our ally Israel against terrorist Hamas, which, to be clear, is a battle of good versus evil, has exposed a level of moral depravity in our country and across the globe that I was shocked and, quite frankly, was unaware even existed. The vote that was taken before this vote was a vote among the Oakland City Council simply to condemn the evils of Hamas. It failed 6-2. You pair that with people tearing down posters of children who exhibit our common humanity. You pair that with people chasing teachers and Jewish students into rooms. What do you have? You have a society that can't say it's wrong to put babies in ovens and kill pregnant women while their babies are beside them still in the umbilical cord. I'm scared for our country. I'm scared for our world. In the UN, where are you, United Nations? You can't even condemn it. Shame on you.
That's right. And Kilmeade, it's almost laughable were it not so horrific. The kinds of people that are parading in front of the microphone who have the luxury of breathing and being alive, the seemingly young people who have been indoctrinated clearly in the Bay Area where I'm from, who, again, have it so good. Life there is so good, except for if you're the people where crime is affecting, lack of housing, inflation, all the like. But they have the luxury of being able to parade around with their signs and, again, their condemnation with their woefully undereducated feelings.
Right. I mean, they live in a mess. Oakland is a crime-ridden city, and they've lost their football team and they're about to lose their baseball team for a good reason. But we should not be surprised by these statements.
They've also lost a great deal of enterprise in those areas of various conglomerates that have decided to walk out. That's kind of like, I think it was Tyson factory. It may not have been Tyson, it may have been some other factory in Chicago that basically threatened the mayor and said that if you cannot protect our loyal people that work for us, pertaining to our employees, we'll be forced to have to move our factory somewhere else, because it's not right for them to have to take a chance on risking their lives just to be able to make a living for themselves and to help produce whatever the factory that they was talking about. They said it's not right. And if I'm not mistaken, the city put a great deal of emphasis upon that area because of that very reason. And that's what's happened out in Oakland and other areas in California. That I got a niece that lives right there in Lodi, pretty close to I don't forgot the name now. where the capital of California is, Sacramento. She probably lives within about an hour and a half from there, pretty close to Lodi. That I worked out there, and I know Stockton is who I was talking about, Stockton, California, of a group of people that are snooty and wants to live above their means, to the point that whole area had to declare bankruptcy just about the time that I was over there in 2012, 2013. And you just got total chaos because there's too many cooks in the kitchen. And there's too many people that's wanting to lean towards ungodliness versus godliness. And because of it, we are knocking on the hinges of God becoming unhinged and throwing this great planet off into great tribulation. And don't think for 1 second that he won't do it, because I promise you he will. I promise you he will.
The same people that are protesting at Columbia, the same people that are going to be at Rockefeller Plaza right across the street today, these people are the next generation. And, you know, evidently you need good grades to get into Harvard. We're still allowed to have good grades, which for now. So Harvard, Yale, Columbia, to get into an Ivy League school, you need grades. So you're not talking about people that are necessarily ignorant. You're talking about they feel as though they are right. And I think sooner or later, if we don't get a hold of this and find out where this emanates.
And you're right, they may not be ignorant. But what they may be is uneducated or educated improperly in giving false information to a group of people that is now siding with the wrong people because they was ignorant of the facts. In other words, they're brainwashed. They wasn't taught properly.
Emanates from, you're going to find politicians who want to get votes from those people refusing to back Israel because they don't get elected if they do, because these 18-year-olds become 22, 26, 28, 32. They become moving up in the executive ranks, and they're going to go all of a sudden be people of power who won't change their minds. And now, next thing you know, we will not have our ally in Israel. And I think it's just absolutely out of control that so far Israel has lost the propaganda war through no fault of their own. And just when I think it's only an American problem, I look overseas. You know, you talk to Piers Morgan, he says these are not just people that have come here first-generation immigrants. There are British people rioting, taking over London, who are rioting for Hamas and the Palestinians. So this is not just an American issue, but there is a right and wrong, and hopefully people will see their way through it.
And you know, to Kilme's point about that Israel's losing the propaganda war, that is the specific goal articulated by Hamas and Iran, to have global condemnation of Israel. In part, and this went back to the violence and sheer atrocities of their attack, was to provoke such a response by Israel as that the globe would condemn it. We've seen that time and time again, but at the end of the day, as Kaylee said, it is good versus evil. There is no sides here, and yet there seems to be sides for all those people in Oakland.
Absolutely, and we know the outcome of this meeting was a unanimous resolution basically calling for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. And that's horrifying in and of itself. But I do think there's an element to this where I honestly find it a little bit funny. Like, thank you so much, Oakland City Council. I'm sure that everyone in the Middle East was waiting with bated breath for you to weigh in on this conflict. But the point is, they don't think that they're actually going to accomplish anything. They know they're not contributing anything to the conflict. What this is there's a common denominator in everyone that you saw get in front of that microphone. You saw it during COVID. You saw it during with Black Lives Matter. You saw it with many of these other social justice causes, which is what you touched on. These people have no moral foundation, so they've had to make one for themselves. This makes them feel good about themselves. They get to pat themselves on the back and say, oh, look, I'm on board with the latest social justice cause. I feel so much better about myself. I'm going to stand up here with a mask on and preach to you all about how you're killing children in Gaza. That is the goal here. This resolution contributes nothing besides a little ego boost for everyone on the city council to feel good about themselves. And they should feel ashamed because they're obviously on the wrong side of the story. But that's what this is about.
And you know, right next to Oakland in the same urban sprawl is Berkeley, California, which has a significant Jewish population. And I wonder, to your point, you know, this does little to actually further anything, but what it does is to stoke fear, rightly so, amongst the Jewish population who are living in neighbors to all of those people who now are.
And I have one tiny thing. Yeah. What this does in seeing this also eliminates, it kind of alleviates for people the suspension of disbelief, which is what we normally do when we go see a movie, is that we disbelieve this dynamic of what's happening in our government. Now this curtain has been pulled back.
Yeah. and it's frightening what's
Can't
behind
unsee
it.
it.
Pro-Palestinian supporters have stormed Grand Central Station and disrupted the Thanksgiving Day parade. Now the big Christmas event they're looking to target? That's next.
What have they done?
Better.
They done something to the parade. A Thanksgiving parade. What are they talking about?
Understand where they're going to be coming from and bike rack them away from the actual event and let them sit a few blocks away from what happens, because getting the publicity is what they want. And believe me, we're in a ceasefire now. They're chanting for a ceasefire. We're in one, you idiots. We're in one right now. And if you want, just take a look at the side-by-sides. We're getting women and children in exchange for convicted prisoners. Are you really against women and children now? Because that's what you're saying.
That's what you're protesting. And the media, Emily, they're culpable in this. I saw this New York Times headline over the weekend, and I mean, I could believe it, but yet I couldn't believe it. It said this: the NYPD detained 34 demonstrators at the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade who were, and this is the key part, protesting Israel's killing of civilians in Gaza. No. That protest, according to the New York Post, had a protester shouting from the river to the sea, which is a genocidal call. But the media frames it as they're protesting Israel, they're the big bad guy.
Softening that narrative does no one any favors to that point. So at this time, we don't have specific or credible threats, but at what point do we? At what point does softening that vile narrative increase in the aftermath and then actually lead to what could be threats? And what kills me about this, I thought Alexis McAdams said this perfectly, where she noted that dozens turns into hundreds, turns into thousands, as we've seen. And so tonight at this point, as we brace ourselves in this city, what could mushroom, and it could have very real effects. And the first front line to that is NYPD, who have seen the lowest amount of members since 1991. They are absolutely spread thin. They've been undergoing assault for so long, and now we are tasking them with, oh, it's New York, so we're going to keep doing the same things over and over again. You know what? Why don't we send a message and cancel it? Why don't we send a message and say, if you're going to disrupt this city, then we're not going to have it here. Why don't we have it in Nashville, where people are actually patriotic and well-behaved? If someone gets hurt tonight, it is squarely on the shoulders of those pro-Hamas protesters and of the feckless Democratic leaders who don't seem to see the reality.
And that's the point. Reality, Kaylee, is this just a lack of information? I mean, I was stunned by those individuals in Oakland who were saying the IDF soldiers did this to their own people. That is false. That is a conspiracy theory.
It's diluted.
I mean, how are they not getting accurate information?
It's not a lack of information. They're making a deliberate choice. And I actually looked up on Instagram the advertisement for this tree lighting protest. The same group that's behind this one was also behind the Macy Day Thanksgiving protest as well. So you're going to see the same sort of elements, which were people in the streets wearing shirts that read capitalism and colonialism, which goes to show that this is not just about Israel. They're also protesting against America and Western civilization and the values that we represent. Because what does capitalism have to do with Gaza? Nothing. But that's the point here, is that it's not a lack of information. They're making a deliberate choice to turn this into some big leftist narrative again. And that's what's been represented in these protests.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Meanwhile, at the White House, heavy winds toppled the national Christmas tree. Crews quickly scrambled to salvage the tree and get it back upright. You can see them there. But the visuals sent social media into a frenzy. The House GOP Judiciary Committee
Oh, God. Somebody didn't tie the tree down properly. They're making it into a big deal.
their own poll. So they had to do a focus group.
Let's go. Let's keep going. Come on. Let's keep going. Right there.
About the black agenda falling along the wayside.
Back up a little bit. Right there.
Like Gavin Newsom, Joe Biden, and the list goes on.
The list goes on. And Kaylee, I want to play this for you. The White House press briefing, there was a really tough question for Karine Jean-Pierre about Stevie Wonder from none other than April Ryan.
I had an in-depth conversation with Stevie Wonder last night, who is... I love Stevie Wonder. Again, it's a serious question. He's very concerned about the black agenda falling along the wayside. Is this president amenable to meeting with Stevie Wonder, who has these concerns?
As far as a meeting with the president, I certainly am not aware of any meetings with Mr. Wonder.
I mean, if you have to tell the room this is a serious question, Kaylee.
Yeah, I didn't realize that April Ryan was now Stevie Wonder's official PR.
Looks like it.
Here we go. I think that, this is really interesting because we remember back to 2020, Trump was already making historic gains among black voters, and now these recent polls show him skyrocketing in support among those voters, to the point where the New York Times actually found that the more diverse a state, the worse Biden performed. And you take Michigan, my home state, for example, about 98% of black voters supported Biden in 2020. Now, according to the New York Times, 62% of black voters in Michigan say that they would support Biden again. That's a 30% drop. Now, I don't know if it necessarily translates to increased support from Trump, but that's not, you don't even need that to hurt Biden. All he needs is those voters to simply stay home and not show up, and he could still lose to Trump. And there was a Wall Street Journal article that was, they interviewed several black voters to sort of get to the root of this and to get to the root of why this drop in support has happened. Mm-hmm. They talked to Michelle Smith, who's a black mother in North Philadelphia. She works 2 jobs. She has 3 teenage boys, and she said that she feels left behind because of the economy. She said that she's now had to take on a 3rd job because of Biden's policies. And she said it's like all of them talk a good game until they get elected. And I think that sums it up.
Wow, alarm bells should be going off for President Biden. So we will
But Kaylee, don't you think Republicans need an agenda for the black community?
Yes.
Not just that we're better than them.
Or
just
we're
take
not
a look.
them, yes,
Yeah, let's
exactly.
go in there and tell me what you'll do and listen and find out how to best serve the urban environment.
Trump has those answers, and they're afraid because they don't, and everyone's got to come together for this country.
So do a town hall in Chicago.
I love that idea. And it's a way to translate poll numbers to votes, which
Yes.
is really what this is all about for the party. New developments in the story involving a young Kansas City Chiefs fan that gained national attention. The boy's mother is now setting the record straight after a liberal media outlet targeted her son.
Wow. What a mess. What a mess.
To argue in his Deadspin piece, where Phillips is not Native American.
Let's back up just a little bit.
Amplify this, and this author has had a history of incendiary and very extremist viewpoints. So to Brian's point, but Deadspin all of a sudden seems to be okay with it, to the very real affect detrimentally on this boy.
Yeah, and I just can't imagine why they would want this to be their brand. It doesn't make any sense. It can't be. I mean, maybe that's the point, though, is to drum up traffic and the conflict. But it's remarkable because when the mom said that her son is Native American, she wasn't saying he's Elizabeth Warren Native American. No, he's actually Native American. His grandfather sits on the board of a tribal council.
Right.
So, and I mean, this goes back to the whole cultural appropriation smear that Phillips was trying to argue in his Deadspin piece, where Phillips is not Native American, and yet he's claiming to be offended on behalf of the Native American community. And you actually had several tribes come out and say, no, we're not offended. We don't mind this. He can wear the headdress. He can paint his face black and red. That doesn't offend us. So it's just absurd that he's manufacturing these crises and division among people groups.
Right. He is African American and expressed his own personal outrage at the blackface, to be clear. But Kaylee, it's also part of sort of a larger machination where, for example, DC spent over $270,000 on a BLM paint job as violent crime skyrockets, as people are being forced out of their homes. We saw that with the NFL itself, investing $10 million into painting the end zones. It takes everyone. And also alongside just play football, there seems to be sort of a lot of virtue signaling here. It would be nice, however, if Goodell could come out and just say, just leave everyone alone.
Right, especially 5-year-olds, especially kindergartners who are not racist. But manufactured crisis, yes, it's like the biggest crisis was the Redskins name until the Washington Post pulled Native Americans, and oh wait, 9 and 10 are just fine with the name. One quick point, this guy, Karen Phillips, I go on his Twitter feed, Pulitzer nominated. Okay, so now you make up Russia collusion thing, lies like New York Times did against Trump, and you get a Pulitzer. Now this guy up for a Pulitzer these days, worthless.
Yeah, and
Let's go to this real quick. Just hang on.
Are you proposing? Because I've been doing a lot of reporting on the hospitals the pediatric hospital in the north, Shifa Hospital, and they've been, the equipment has been broken. They don't have staffing. They've been told to evacuate. I don't know how an outside group would reasonably take over and staff these hospitals with the lack of fuel and the lack of supplies and all the rest.
Andrea, what I'm looking for is credible reports on these hospitals, and looking for a third party that the public and the parties that are involved will accept. And it's not an easy thing. In fact, some organizations have told me pointedly they don't want to get involved in that. It's too political. It could backfire on it. But what I'm trying to establish is the fact that, number one, it is a legitimate hospital. It is not a command and control center or a place of military importance. Number two, to give us an assessment and inventory of what they're lacking. I've heard the stories, and you have too. The amputations of limbs of children without anesthesia, the only pain medication, Tylenol, trying to clean wounds with vinegar because they have no disinfectants. I mean, these are outrageous situations that are going to be worse if the fighting resumes. I pray it won't, but if it does. So I'm still searching for that third party. I'm going to reach out to the United Nations and see if they can give me some guidance.
And I mean, Doctors Without Borders have lost some personnel. They've had terrible losses, even where they are in Gaza. And I was hearing from nurses at the Rantisi Hospital, the pediatric hospital, when they were accused of being Hamas-based or in Hamas in the basement. And the nurse there was saying, I go to the basement all the time. And before we were told to evacuate, there were thousands of sheltering people, families on the floor there. You could barely walk to pick up, some diapers or supplies because there were so many people there. Where were these Hamas people? But since they've been evacuated, who knows who's in there now? And how do you get rid of the tunnels? I mean, Hamas could be back in the tunnels.
I understand that it is a complex situation, and Hamas has used these hospitals as a veiled effort to continue their military operations in a safe way. And I do not want to in any way support that. But the bottom line is the hospitals that are real hospitals that have real needs should be identified and protected. We should let it be known to both sides that these hospitals have to be kept out of the conflict. That is not unreasonable. It is basic, and it's consistent with international law when it comes to humane treatment of individuals at wartime.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. And one other thing, that without enough fuel for cell phones and for the generation of cell phone coverage, as well as for people to charge their phones, 80% of the population has been displaced. They're in the south. Israel has not yet agreed that if they resume hostilities that they won't attack the south, as far as we know. The U.S. has been pressing for that. And a lot of these people can't communicate with each other to get out. There are these pediatric cancer patients. 32 have gotten out on a list of 52. But people don't know how to get in touch with them to assemble, to get them out through Rafah.
And Andrea, one other element that there's been a promise for weeks from the Israeli ambassador and others of hospital ships that are going to be brought to the scene to try to provide some relief to what you just described. I'm still waiting. I hope it was today that it happened, but it's been promised for a long time. That kind of supplemental medical care could be critical.
Let me switch to what's happening here on the border negotiations, which could become a poison pill for both Ukraine and Israel aid. You, along with the majority of your Senate Democratic candidates, are calling on the White House to better explain how Israel is also using taxpayer money, some conditionality. What's the progress on either of those issues?
Conversation is underway, but there's been no agreement on language or process at this point. But I would just say this week that among my Democratic colleagues in the Senate, they've said unequivocally we support Israel's right to exist. We support their right to defend themselves. We believe what happened on October 7th, and I saw the videotape yesterday. What happened on October 7th was an atrocity. But we ask that Israel and any military action be sensitive to the collateral damage of innocent individuals. I think that has been the message consistently this week. It's the same message I bring when it comes to protecting the hospitals moving forward. But we have not reached any agreement as to any conditionality.
What are your concerns about some of the Republican language in these negotiations on southern border and asylum issues and refugee issues?
Andrea, let me tell you something. My mother was an immigrant to this country, and I haven't forgotten that immigrants have made America. Sadly, some of the Republicans that are wanting to sit at the table only view immigration in negative terms. I agree that we have to have a new process at the border, which brings order to the situation, which has been overwhelmed by the numbers of refugees from all over the world. That has to be done, but it has to be done thoughtfully. The idea of eliminating what's known as parole, the president's authority to allow people to come to this country, is absolutely unacceptable to me. Emergency situations like Ukraine make parole absolutely essential in times with those dire situations. And I would just say my biggest concern is there are people sitting at that table negotiating who are not who are opposed to any new immigration in America. If we need new medical personnel to come to America, doctors, nurses, to keep our hospitals open in Illinois, both downstate as well as the city, obviously immigrants are needed. We certainly need them in our agricultural sector. We've got to take a balanced view towards immigration. Don't overdo it, don't abuse it, but don't ignore the fact that it's a critical part of our history and our economy.
Senator Dick Durbin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And a final farewell. Family.
Wow.
At promoting normal.
Where did that go? Right there. Nothing.
Declared a state of emergency and said the quiet part out loud, and I quote, Massachusetts has stepped up to address the crisis that sadly has been a federal crisis of inaction that is many years in the making, unquote. So one thing's clear, even Democrats now in their sanctuary cities are realizing that Biden has created this border crisis, and Democrats have ignored it for years. Republicans, thankfully, are finally stepping up and leading where they failed. Any of my friends from across the aisle, if they want to help us, if they want to end this crisis, they can vote for the rule today and vote for the underlying legislation. But I'd like to yield, talking about New York, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to my good friend from the state of New York, Representative Langworthy.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the gentleman from Pennsylvania for yielding the time. And he talked about sanctuary policies, and that's really at the root of what we're talking about here today, and the so-called sanctuary policies of President Biden and Governor Kathy Hochul in New York and Mayor Eric Adams, who refuses to pull those sanctuary cities back. These policies have failed, and the American people are paying the consequences. Millions of illegal immigrants have flooded across our borders since President Biden took office, and his administration has refused to even acknowledge the crisis that has unfolded. 2 years ago, it was communities only along our southern border that seemed to almost exclusively carry this burden for this self-inflicted humanitarian crisis. Now, that burden is shared by cities and towns and villages as far north as my own state of New York, where communities in my own district, very far from the southern border in upstate New York, have declared a state of emergency as their limited resources are stretched to the breaking point to handle the influx of illegal immigrants. And now here we are, with thousands of migrant families, including children, shivering in tent cities at Floyd Bennett Field in Staten Island in New York City. Mr. Speaker, moving forward, I hope my Democratic colleagues will think twice before accusing House Republicans of cruelty, callousness, or inhumanity when it comes to securing our border and fixing our broken immigration system. Because opening our borders to human traffickers and drug cartels, cramming migrant families into broken down motels in freezing tent cities, and failing to account for 85,000 unaccompanied minors is the textbook definition of cruel, callous, and inhumane.
try to restore everything from my backup, which hopefully you have, and hopefully you've tested, and hopefully they aren't infected? Or do you pay the ransom? And that's really for what companies have to make that decision, which way do they want to go. And this is particularly problematic in hospitals, especially this group, because they're so disparate across the country that you just need one person to do the wrong thing, click a link, open an email, and stuff like this happens.
It does. Now, Ardent Health does say it cannot confirm the extent of any patient health or financial data that has been compromised. So they're not getting into that. Obviously, this is very sensitive information. So hopefully the people will be protected. Now, I want to ask you before we run out of time about this water utility hack, because it's a big concern when we're talking about, soft targets for hackers. I mean, water. Now, they do make it clear here, the general manager, as you see, he told Politico that the Utronics devices would not give attackers the ability to alter chemicals used in drinking water. But who's to say that they couldn't go after something again and, if they were able to access it? What's your read on what happened there and the possibility of it happening at other water treatment plants in our country?
I think it will happen again. Actually, there was another story in Texas where a water treatment plant got hit as well. Whether they had Israeli parts is hard to say, but Israel is a big exporter of water treatment facility software and hardware. And I think you and I had this discussion about a month ago when this all started, that if you're using Israeli software or hardware, you're going to be a target. And here we're seeing it now. It's going to continue on. You're going to see more of this, not just domestically, but globally as well, where Israeli associated software and hardware manufacturers are targeted wherever they are.
Well, we hope the message is getting out and they take those protections to try to prevent them in the first place. Obviously, that's where you want to stop the hack before it happens. Darren Mott, always a pleasure to have you on Newsline. Thanks so much, sir.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You too. All right, we'll be right back. Much more ahead.
Total chaos. Total chaos.
And I'm glad you called because it reminded me to say this portion. Let me tease that and say first about fundamentalism. I'm not prepared to go whole hog against religion, but I do think that this court sits to question fundamentalism. I do think that this community gathers in order to question whether it's market fundamentalism or religious fundamentalism. The idea that some simple, maybe not truth, should justify bad things because it is so important. That if your fundamental view is so fundamental that you think it justifies real evil or acts that you would in another context deem as evil, you should at least be willing to consider that fundamentalist view. And once you start doing that, you become less of a fundamentalist. But I do think fundamentalism is one of the things we have to be squarely addressing. But now to the thing that you made this competition point, and it really did. You said the competition point, and it stuck with me because I realized it's onto something. I think the left misses this sometimes, that human beings at our best do have a desire to strive. It's not the only instinct we have. Arguably that's the most important we have. Our desire to nurture, to share, to love. These are probably the things we need to lean into. We do have this instinct to strive. So what can we strive for? What can we compete for? What are the things that would actually make one another stronger rather than more oppressive if we tap into that? That's a good underlying topic as well.
You're listening. Well, as you can see, it's total chaos.
Seen so many personal touches from Mrs. Carter herself, from the music selection, songs that she truly enjoyed, the pianist, who was a personal favorite of her and President Carter. And one other thing that you may have noticed today is that many people were wearing leis inside the ceremony today. Well, I spoke with a representative from the Carter Center, and he told me that that's actually twofold. Of course, it's a nod to their early days of living together in Hawaii many years ago, but also that they have a close personal friend, couples of friends who live in Hawaii. They wanted to do something after her passing, and so in the days after her death, they sent a number of leis from Hawaii here to Georgia, and the family wore those today. Andrea.
And I think we have some of the video of former President Jimmy Carter, who came. He's in that wheelchair with a blanket as the family is walking after hers, and he came out of hospice, as you know, Lane, for the service. You see the children and great grandchildren too. Yes.
You know, it was so remarkable because we saw the motorcade pull in. We saw a number of people gathering around. But before he was wheeled out of his vehicle, the family surrounded it, almost like in a protective sort of way. And it was so notable because, of course, as you can imagine, there are a number of cameras here. And so to see his family walking with him slowly and very intentionally up that entire walk and into the church was just a moving moment as well, Andrea.
Plain Alexander, sad but so meaningful duty there in Plains, Georgia. Thank you very much. And we have breaking news on the hostages potentially being released from Gaza today, which could be the last day of hostage release. We don't know. NBC News is now confirming that an American citizen could be among them, according to a U.S. official and a diplomat, both with knowledge of these fast-moving events. The officials are cautioning that the situation is still very fluid. Nothing is final until these hostages are turned over to the Red Cross and are actually out of Gaza. We expect more on all of this coming up, of course, at the top of the hour and throughout the day on MSNBC. And that does it for this edition of Andrea Mitchell Reports. Remember, follow us on social media at Mitchell.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Amman 4. Here's what's coming up. 6 days into the Israel-Hamas truce, and negotiators are working toward a further extension. More hostages and prisoners set to be released. I asked Middle East expert Khaled El-Gindi what we know about those Palestinian detainees. Then, no more excuses. I speak with Commonwealth Secretary General Patricia Scotland about her calls for faster climate action ahead of the UN Climate Summit COP28. Also ahead for us, is social media safe for kids? The Colorado Attorney General tells me why he's leading a lawsuit against Facebook parent Meta. Plus, The Atlantic's Tom Nichols says Trump has crossed a crucial line. He discusses that with Michelle Martin. Welcome to the program, everyone. I'm Bianca Golodriga in New York, sitting in for Christiane Amanpour. A truce between Israel and Hamas is now in its 6th day, with key mediator Qatar hopeful that a further extension will be announced soon. The U.S. echoes that hope. Here's Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking today at a NATO meeting in Brussels.
Did I read that right? 245,000 people dead.
Tom Nichols says Trump has crossed a crucial line. He discusses that with Michelle Martin. Welcome to the program, everyone. I'm Bianca Golodriga in New York, sitting in for Christiane Amanpour. A truce between Israel and Hamas is now in its
I guess I did. 2,045,000 dead from COVID last year. My God. My God.
on its 6th day, with key mediator Qatar hopeful that a further extension will be announced.
Down from I guess that's 3,85,000 in 2022. And 4,62,000 in 2021. 4 million. Went from 4 million to 3 million to 2.4 million. So I guess there's not as many people dying now of COVID as what it was. Which, looking at it from that perspective, I guess that's a good thing, right?
But this next phase, another extension, could now start the conversation about releasing potentially American men or anyone who is connected to the military who is being held, who might be a woman or a man as well. Those conversations still have to take place, and there's so much that needs to be ironed out. But I am told by a U.S. official that the Biden administration maintains it is hopeful that extension will take place today. But again, we have to just stress, Chris, that we don't know if that's going to happen.
Palcott, live there in Tel Aviv for us. Greg, thank you. John.
Sandra, let's bring in Adam Bowler. He helped negotiate the Abraham Accords and negotiated with the Taliban on behalf of the Trump administration. He's also the former CEO of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. Adam, great to have you in the studio here.
Yeah, thanks.
You're usually coming to us from Nashville. Welcome back to D.C. So the big question here is, how long is this truce, ceasefire, pause, whatever you want to call it, going to last? And how many hostages do you think ultimately can be brought out?
It's interesting. So right now what's happening, obviously you have William Burns in Qatar. He's negotiating with Sheikh Mohammed in Qatar and then General Kamal from Egypt. I've directly negotiated with General Kamal and with Sheikh Mohammed. They're both very serious people. Obviously you have William Burns and then you have the Mossad head there. It's the right cast of characters to do something. And so this is my guess. I think it's likely you'll see at least a day or two. That's going to buy them time. That has to be conditioned on hostages being released, clearly. And it sounds like the Qataris are feeling pretty good about some adult males being released, because that's what's going to have to happen here. So that's what I think you're going to get, a day or two. And then the question is, what's going to happen after that?
Yeah, we had Rachel Goldberg on yesterday, whose son Hirsch had half his arm blown off when Hamas was trying to take captives. She has no idea of his status, though she saw a video of him, hopes that he got the appropriate medical treatment for his grievous wounds. But she has no idea whether he's alive or dead, or where he might be and what condition he could potentially be in. This idea of an extended pause, ceasefire, the UN Secretary General Guterres wants this to be a prolonged ceasefire, and he's pushing in that direction. Pressure seems to be mounting every day on Israel to accept this idea of a lengthy ceasefire. Netanyahu and others, Gallant, keep saying, no, we can't do that because we have to complete the job of decapitating Hamas. But Hamas is playing this for everything it possibly can and using these hostages to as much advantage as it can. How do you think ultimately this is going to end up?
This is the question. So this was the risk in the first place of Israel doing this. And Hamas is a master at the PR of these things and playing the victim. It's what they do. It's what they've done. And now we're hearing about releasing hostages for Palestinian. The Palestinians there are criminals. Right. Last I checked, the hostages, they're convicted criminals. Last I checked, the hostages, like the 11-month-old that they're saying is dead, isn't a convicted criminal. So first, and one is 1 to 3 on the release. So here's the question. How can you eliminate Hamas? I can only really see two great paths. One is Israel finishes the job. The only other alternative, and I see General Kamal there in for Egypt, is who's taking accountability. The only country I could see possibly is Egypt. Obviously, they border. There's some trust there. They have the military strength to do it and to ensure that Hamas is gone. If they're really gone, it's the only alternative I could see, because otherwise, who's policing Gaza?
So tell us about the sense in the region in regard to Hamas, because most of the Arab countries are standing up for the Palestinians. But we also hear that quietly behind the scenes, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the Bahrainis, maybe even the Qataris to some degree are saying, we don't like this Hamas group. They're causing too much trouble. We don't like the fact that Iran is messing around with all of these proxy groups and creating instability in the region. So where do they really stand on Hamas?
You know, it's interesting. I had a meeting with some of the ambassadors of some of our moderate Arab friends. And this is what they said to me. They said, what's interesting is there is more concern at American universities than there are in our countries, because they've been through this. So they know. And one of the things, and this is why I'm sometimes cautiously optimistic.
And I'm just going to stop right there and weigh in on what he's talking about. I have brought this up before, And I realize it probably don't set well with your professors, and it don't set well with your administrators and those that has made such leaps and bounds in the educational industry pertaining to national exchange student programs. It was the National Exchange Student Program that allowed for the Arabic community to come over here and target my family whenever I was all broken up physically with 2 broken legs, 2 crushed ankles, 3 crushed vertebrae, 2 ruptured discs, and 2 broken arms, laid up in the hospital for 6 weeks and 3 days, being pulled together like Humpty Dumpty back together again. It was these people that targeted me because obviously word had gotten out that I had fallen off of a 4-story building and I survived. Not only did I survive, but God healed me to the degree that I actually went back to work. I had to change occupations. No longer was a connector hanging steel up in the air, but I changed occupations and become self-sufficient for about 35 years, leading into where I am today. Now, before I become self-sufficient in 1983, which was 4 years after 1979, was whenever another event happened in my life that once more God intervened. And don't think that whenever a supernatural event pertaining to God, either healing somebody or intervening in some sort of a miracle, don't think that the supernatural world pertaining to the evil demonic supernatural world are not aware of these things, because it is. Whenever that occurred in my life, then I become even targeted that much even more. But this time it was not just by the Arabic community, but this time it was by my own people in 1983. And of course that led into what happened in my life in 1991. After 9 tapes went to the White House in 1988. After my son and I had been on a crusade in 1989, going up to Washington, D.C. and New York, going up to the boroughs in New York and passing out all kinds of material. And then all of a sudden, here comes Secret Service going to do the same thing. White man speaketh with forked tongue. White man talked about peace pertaining to Ronald Reagan's administration, that Bush climbed on board with no new taxes, read my lips, but then turned around and done just the very opposite towards going to war with the people over in the Middle East pertaining to Saddam Hussein. Because that event happened, led to the exchange of events that happened in 9/11. That even to this day, as Donald J. Trump continues to keep telling people about, the American people has still not gotten down to the bottom of. I still believe that the student exchange program that I guess is on a global scale is what opened the door up towards me being vulnerable in my own county, right here in Weakley County, Tennessee, and Martin, Tennessee, where the college was, towards basically being targeted the first time in 1979. It was actually 1980 or 1981 whenever I was actually targeted. But by that time, the word had gotten out that I had fallen off a 4-story building and was still alive. So I can place the dots together in not only the educational arena pertaining to your colleges that wanted to teach everybody how to push a pencil and answer a telephone, but wasn't nobody willing to learn how to be pipers and welders and plumbers and carpet layers and frame builders and all the above pertaining to manual labor. Between the colleges, the psychiatric community, the political parties, and the church, so-called corporate church religious organizations here in America, it has basically tried to destroy my life. And in ways it already has, because now of my age, of me only being able basically to get my story out before the people that even to this day still do not have supporters of that I know of. Now, if they're supporting me, they're doing it metaphorically, as far as silently, and I'm not aware of any type of support coming from any of these church members around here, not only in West Tennessee, but also in Kentucky or Oklahoma or some of these other places that I've been to in the past 10 years, that as far as I'm concerned, this thing, just as President Putin talks about, the Western world is at fault because they did not properly do the proper thing whenever the 9 tapes went to Ronald Reagan and they was talking about peace out of one side of their mouth, but the other side was not responding to it. In other words, they wanted to use me as a poster child. They wanted to use me as somebody that was basically the spear of something, but they wasn't willing to actually support me in getting in behind me and allowing for me to take center stage in cooperating and being able to expose the Bible the way that the Bible needed to be exposed in that event. Because now of this resistance movement that has been going on now for over 30 plus years, it has put the world in peril. So whenever Putin blames the Western world for the chaos, in lots of ways he's actually right, by saying that the Western world cheated the Russians because they was telling them one thing, while on the other hand was not willing to follow up with it. And to this day, I still don't have supporters pertaining to Randy Brundage, the mayor of Martin. I still don't have no cooperation coming from the deans or security coming from UTM University pertaining to allowing for me to get back on any of their premises, towards even going to a rodeo show or a ball game or going to the library or any of the above, or a concert or whatever. I am still isolated from living a regular, normal life as a Tennessean here in the state of Tennessee in Weakley County, Northwest Tennessee. So, you know, whenever you still continually getting either negative activity or no activity, it pretty well speaks volumes about the type of people that are still involved in the resistance movement, that I am thoroughly convinced that they are willing to basically allow for the world to catch on fire and burn and burn and burn and burn and burn them with it before they're willing to come clean. And you would think by now people like Tommy Moore and Pence and Tommy Thomas and Mike Wilson, pertaining to the sheriff that was engaged here in Weakley County for 9 consecutive terms, you would think by now somebody would have already made contact with me towards trying to make amends. Not just only on a personal one-to-one level, but on a professional level, and I still have yet to obtain that type of what word am I looking for? Recompense, in regards towards what has went on in God calling me into his kingdom in helping to orchestrate the Windmill Ministries missions. So as I'm watching things unfolding and I'm watching things basically unraveling the way that they are, it's really sad, because all of this could have been prevented. But like I said, I'm thoroughly convinced that the people that was engaged in this resistance movement, either on the front end or the latter end, because I mean, you have to be able to look at the records to be able to prove that something was truly going on in the community towards us being attacked again and again and again, either at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, or 430 Beech Grove Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, because of us having to call out law enforcement out here on the property on average of twice a month for 3 consecutive years. There had to have been something that was going on that was inappropriate, that the law was fully aware of. And the law, to me, was either in behind it happening, or the law was inadequate in allowing for it to happen, pertaining to dereliction of duty, in which either or, now I've got a dead brother to basically try to vindicate because of that, in which what happened in his life that shouldn't have happened in his life, pertaining to his peers and the neighborhood basically coming up against me and him becoming collateral damage in the middle. So whenever you get to looking at the educational field, look at all the student loans that now the government is having to basically take back seat on. Look at all the other stuff that our government has failed its own people in, regardless whether it's hacking, regardless whether it's stopping all the illegal immigrants from coming over here. I could go on and on and on about the failures coming from various government officials that are only intensifying rather than reducing. They're actually getting worse. And to think that these same people are still in their same positions, drawing their big checks, speaks volumes about what type of people that they are. And a lot of them are actually throwing their hat in towards wanting to run for office again next year or the year after next. The same people that got us in this mess are still in behind the desks, are still answering the telephone calls, are still leading the charge. The same people. And that's the part there that is sickening. And as far as I'm concerned, our ancestors are probably rolling around and around in their graves. And I've come to the conclusion, whenever it comes to fairness, whenever it comes to being decent, the word decency, whenever it comes to these people doing the moral and right thing, it ain't going to happen. The only way that it's going to happen is to force these people out into the open and force them of doing the proper and right thing. And of course, they'll come to people like me and say, well, maybe we would have done the right thing, Dennis, if you would have went about doing it the right way. Okay, well, what is the right way? Hiring an attorney, being out more money, still becoming a laughingstock to the broken system that's been broken now for years and years and years that got us this trouble to begin with? I've heard so many people in the past 10 years talk about our justice system that it all surrounds money. That if you got money, you can basically talk your way out of a murder charge. And I tend to wonder in lots of different cases that that's exactly what has occurred. Our system has become tainted. It's not only broken, but it's tainted. And you no longer have good, sound, decent people that are willing to do the right thing without some sort of an injunction coming from an attorney standing in front of another crooked judge towards determining whether or not the victim was done wrong or not. God speaks for me pertaining to all this. And even if I have to sit idly back and wait until great tribulation falls upon to not only America but the whole planet, and basically the whole planet catches on fire because of this stupidity, I'm going to sit by. I'm not going to hire an attorney. I refuse to play into their entrapment techniques anymore. Because that's exactly what it is. I'm 62 years old, and basically all I can do is, like I'm doing right now, is making my videos and putting out my message to the general public, and those that are compassionate towards wanting to help me, more the merrier. But I'm not going to beg. I'm not going to threaten. I'm not going to demand, because that's not how true, authentic, godly people does things. Jesus Christ didn't do that. Jesus Christ didn't do none of that. Several of the prophets in the Bible didn't do that. And that's the reason why Christ said, shake the dust off your feet and move on, for it would have been better for Sodom and Gomorrah, for the group of people that wouldn't support you and listen to you and back you. For 30-something years, that's what I've been watching. And now it's unraveling. not just on a year-to-year level, not just on a month-to-month or a week-to-week level, not just on a day-to-day level, but a minute-by-minute level of growing and intensifying and getting worse, going in the opposite direction towards peace and utopia, love, mercy, and grace. Who's to blame? Was it the messenger that had the message that nobody wanted to support? Or was it those that should have supported the messenger, even though they didn't like the message, that now has sat idly by and allowed for this thing to flourish and to get this far out of hand? Once again, Dennis James Jackson did not fail the Windmill Ministries missions. It was the general public, especially the church commissioners and the church body, that failed the Windmill Ministries because they didn't stand up, read the Bible accordingly, interpret the Bible accordingly, in understanding that this has always been an end-time biblical Bible message that, yes, surrounds love, grace, peace, mercy, the teachings of Christ, but also supports end-time apocalyptic, catastrophic messages.
The optimistic medium to long term is Hamas, I believe, hoped that everyone was going to rally here, and they have not. And that's because of the Abraham Accords and the work that was done. And that shows something. We have more of an issue in the United States than their populations do.
Yeah. We should point out that the pictures that we're seeing on the screen, these were taken just a little while ago. These are of two dual citizen Israeli Russians that were released ahead of the 10 Israeli hostages that were expected to be released. Hamas apparently released these two as a gesture to Putin, trying to stay in his good graces. Ultimately, when this is over, Hamas is trying desperately to survive. And again, it's going to use these hostages for all it can. If Hamas does survive, what does that portend for negotiations between Israel and Saudi Arabia on extending the Abraham Accords?
Well, I think, for one, if Hamas survives, it's just in the short term. Israel has a very long memory. Mm-hmm. We know it from the Munich Olympics.
Yes. They got everybody except for the mastermind.
That's right.
Ultimately.
This time, hopefully, they'll get everybody. But I think that's medium to long term will be solved if Israel does its job. In the short term, if they survive, they've got to be out, and you've got to have somebody else there. I do. Again, you see Saudi, it's not what Saudi says. It's what Saudi doesn't say. Mm-hmm. So look for what these Arab countries are not saying. It shows that they've moderated. They don't want the real battle here, and that's why you see Hamas cozying up to Putin. The real battle here is Iran, Russia, to some extent China. But it is a battle, and to be clear, not only against Israel, but against the United States. So that's the real alignment, and it is what those countries aren't saying.
Now, he just got through explaining to you the outward surfaces of the problem. There's a deeper, more cynical problem from within the problem that goes even to people that we believe was our allies, that in actuality is our enemies. And eventually this will all come out in the wash, and eventually the people will see just exactly what I'm talking about, just like I can prove to you that there's agents that have proven that it was Saudi Arabia that was financing the terrorists that was over here living in hotels, learning how to fly planes, and wasn't nobody willing to learn how to land them, that it was all being sponsored from Saudi Arabia. It was Saudi Arabia that wanted to vindicate their own people. You keep in mind, it's a religious war pertaining to them being Muslims. It was Saudi Arabia that wanted to vindicate the people that died whenever Desert Storm and Desert Shield happened during the Bush era. Now, they'll tell you something different. But I guarantee you, before this is all said and done with, it will come out in the wash. Proof will be in the pudding towards just exactly what I'm talking about, towards it being true.
And I think that's really powerful. If we play our cards right, that's really powerful.
So just as an example, what aren't they saying?
I don't think we know how to play our cards at this point in time, because now the whole hand has been shuffled around. It's been basically thrown up into the air, and see what card lands on what card, and what card's heads and what card's tails. And right now, I don't think our intel, our CIA, the Pentagon, much less the White House, knows how to play what card and what card first, because of various politicians before them that has got us in the trouble that we're in right now. That once more, Putin verifies by saying it's the Western world's fault because of what's going on in the Middle East. And trust me, I'm not for Putin, because as far as I'm concerned, he's just as bad as Hamas. He's another, that government agency over there has turned into nothing more than a evil empire, just like Ronald Reagan discussed before the falling of the Berlin Wall, before the agreement with Hussein, Brezhnev, the person that come after Brezhnev, and Ronald Reagan. Before that agreement ever took place, it was chaos. Well, they only went halfway to the agreement. They only got half of it right. And the reason why I say that is because the very spear, once more, the poster child that they wanted to say that they supported, in actuality, they never supported, because if they did, I would have a Joel Osteen congregation or an Osteen support team, much less just the people right here close to me that refuses to have anything to do with me. So once more, proof is in the pudding. The American Western world never truly wanted peace because of the rejection coming from the corporate religious sector. And now we're all going to pay for it. But yet now they're still not coming clean. Because if they did, somebody would have already dropped me a letter or knocked on my door.
They're not inciting, so they're not inciting their populations. They're saying they want ceasefire. They're saying they're concerned for Palestinian citizens, of course, but they're not aggressively pushing like they would years before. When you saw intifadas before, there was very aggressive language and action and dollars flowing. And not anymore.
All right, so the language from this administration to Israel, as Israel contemplates the end of the ceasefire and what military operations will bring after that, they're talking about operations in Khan Yunis in the south of Gaza. It's widely believed that the Hamas leadership has already fled the north and has taken up residence again in the south. Listen to what Sabrina's saying, the deputy press secretary at the Pentagon, said about that yesterday.
Any operations that they do in the south might look a little different from how they were conducting them in the north. But again, we are not telling them how to conduct their operations. This is an IDF mission. They are in control of how they conduct their operations on the ground.
So again, like Saudi Arabia, we have a difference here of what's being said in public and what's not being said in public, what's being said quietly behind the scenes. And we get this idea that quietly behind the scenes, Biden is pushing Netanyahu to really moderate his kinetic operations to ensure that Palestinian civilians do not find themselves in harm's way. And since those million Palestinians have been pushed to the south, this administration believes that they are in grave danger if Israel expands its kinetic operations to the south.
You cannot have an all-out-and-out assault war without having collateral damage on both sides. It's impossible. That's the reason why they put it in the definition of it being war. Now, what America tried to do, they didn't fulfill it. And if they tell you that they did, they're lying. Pertaining to Desert Storm and Desert Shield, they tried to do strategically, basically pinpointing the people in the areas that they wanted to go in and dismantle without causing as much collateral damage. But even at that, there was still collateral damage on both sides. A lot of times, our own people would become injured because of failure of our own equipment that basically blowed up in their faces. So there's going to be collateral damage whenever there's war. So the question, the $64,000 question is this. First of all, does Israel, do they have a right to protect themselves because of being attacked this way? Absolutely, 100%. Secondly, is Israel in their frame of mind knowing that if they do not watch, Hamas will only regroup with probably God only knows who, and the next thing you know, instead of just fighting one group, you'll liable to be fighting 7 or 8, including different countries that will pile on to Jerusalem, Israel, because of what Hamas has started. So it's really a powder keg just waiting to explode one way or the other, and either way, there's going to be collateral damage. Now, does that mean that I'm against going after the hostages and making hostage agreements and trying to get the innocent out of harm's way? Absolutely not. I'm all for that. I believe that if you can save life, save it. Please save it, especially at the expense of innocent lives of men, women, and children. But there comes a time whenever even that is basically impossible due to the surrounding circumstances that the enemy has brought upon to the good. Because of the surrounding circumstances that the enemy has brought upon to the good. That would be like saying, well, it's heaven's fault because heaven decided that they was going to kick Lucifer out of heaven, and a third of the angels followed after Lucifer, which now are no longer labeled as angels, but labeled as demons. So it's God's fault because Lucifer challenged God? See how mixed up society is? Whenever God done what God done, he done that because he was provoked. He was challenged. He himself, the creator, was defending his own kingdom by telling those that was against him, get out and stay out, and they'll never be permitted to go back in. So now this spiritual warfare that began up there now is going on down here. And if we're not smart enough to identify that and recognize that, then evil will always have an upper hand over good. Because, you know what? Bad things happen to good people. Because you know what? Sometimes good people has to do bad things just to overpower the bad in general. Just like the leader of the NRA said the only way to defeat a bad person with a gun is with a good person with a gun, which is basically common sense. You hate to use the gun, but I'd rather have it and not use it than to need it and not have it. And that's basically where Israel is right now, Jerusalem, in regards towards all this, that they know that if they let it go, it's only going to fester, and they're going to have to be engaged in another battle on down the road. It may be a month, maybe a week, maybe a year, maybe 10 years from now, but it's going to happen again and again and again. And Hamas has done already said that their primary objective is to desecrate Jerusalem, Israel, and after they get through with them, they're after us. That was declared in 93. And America didn't take reverence to it. Some of our military personnel did, but the Americans in general didn't take reverence to it, that now it's coming full circle.
Well, I saw on Capitol Hill that you have a number of Democratic lawmakers that are saying that we have to condition aid to Israel based on how they operate, but it is an impossible situation. It's a finger trap. Get rid of Hamas, but do it in a place the size of Manhattan and the boroughs, where they're using civilians and hiding behind civilians in hospitals. How do you do that? It's an impossible situation. And so I think there's no question If you don't have Egypt step up to eliminate Hamas or other Arab countries, and Israel needs to finish the job, which they would need to do, you're going to have a situation from a civilian perspective. It's impossible not to.
We should point out, Adam, that we're getting new live pictures here. And you see there again the phalanx of Israeli ambulances as they prepare to receive another group of, we believe it's going to be 10 hostages that are being transferred at the Rafah crossing at the Egypt-Gaza border. The way that this is proceeded is that typically a bus will come in or some SUVs from the International Committee of the Red Cross. The hostages will get off. They'll be given a brief preliminary medical check at this facility here. They'll also, I think, be debriefed by Israeli special forces, and then they'll be loaded into those.
I do go along with there has to be a two-state resolution pertaining to their problems over there. If not, you will never see peace in the Middle East. Just like there's going to have to be some sort of a solution regarding what's going on right now with Russia and the Ukrainians. There's going to have to be some sort of meeting in the middle. If not, their confrontation over there can go on endlessly for the next years. And if you think about it, Russia's got a whole lot more people and a whole lot more money than what the Ukrainians do, and basically the Ukrainians are basically just setting ducks. But at the same time, you got to give them credit, because they're not willing to lay down and run like the Pakistanians was, the Afghanistans was over in Afghanistan. They wasn't willing just to lay down and die and allow for the terrorist group to take them back over 11 days later. That if they die, they're going to die in their own dignity and dying for their own cause. And I admire people that's willing to do that. And if you're not, then that's fine too. But this problem has only escalated and is only growing even that much more dire.
What they're saying and what they're not saying when it comes to Israel and the resumption of military operations.
At first, I want to give John Kirby credit, because I really appreciate what he's saying and the National Security Council's support so far, because I think it's impressive. And so I think that's a wonderful thing. We'll see whether Biden follows through.
All right. As we watch this process unfold again, Adam, let's bring in Sandra to the coverage as we're awaiting what is likely the transfer of another 10 hostages of Israeli.
Who's Sandra? Sandra? Maybe they're not going to show her.
To dribble it out, there's a reason why Hamas still has Americans. They're using that as leverage against the United States. If they released Americans, they think maybe the United States would have less interest and we wouldn't push for a ceasefire. So Hamas is very good at this. So they're going to dribble it out. You're going to see them hold Americans till the very last moment. You're still seeing them hold kids. We've got an 11-month-old they're saying is dead, a 4-year-old. Fine, let's see, where are they? You said they were killed by an Israeli airstrike. I have my doubts. They're probably killed because they were taken hostage. I want to see where those kids are. So they are not fulfilling their end of the bargain. I do think that if Hamas backs off the 10, Israel should act.
Yeah, and just on that front, Israel has not confirmed whether Kfir Bibas was indeed killed, as one Hamas feed on Telegram suggests, but they're checking it out. Sandra?
Just to continue to take our viewers through what is on your screen right now, looking live at the Rafah border crossing there. This is the Egypt-Gaza border, very similar to this time yesterday. You've got a situation where hospital vehicles, Red Cross vehicles are lining up. The Red Cross vehicles, as we sort of toggle between these live shots, are carrying released hostages as they arrive there at the border crossing. Media is gathered there. There's obviously medical professionals. We've already seen some of the hostages driven away. And there are vehicles standing by there at the border crossing. Adam, Benjamin Netanyahu underscored that Israel will continue its campaign to eliminate Hamas. He was very clear in his most recent words, saying that after this phase of returning our abductees is exhausted, will Israel return to fighting? So my answer is an unequivocal yes. There is no way we are not going back to fighting until the end. But that timing and how this all plays out, When that plays out, that is going to be tricky. That is going to be a sensitive situation with the number of hostages that still remain. And that is what we have left to see, how that plays out over the coming days.
I just want to comment that the reason that we're even in this situation where hostages are being released is because Israel pressed Hamas. If they hadn't entered the north and done what they had done, they wouldn't have Hamas on the run. Hamas tried to stop that from happening. They tried to negotiate before. It is the reason they're at the table in the first place is because Israel pressed hard. And so absent a solution where we see somebody like Egypt take responsibility for the Strip, Israel has to go back in. It's not going to help get the hostages out if they relax. And so if we see the 10 hostages, fine, that's the deal they made. The moment they renege on that deal, the moment it changes, there's no end until we're in there and Hamas is out.
So, Adam, one quick question just before we go back to Greg Palkot, who's standing by for us in Israel. When we take a look at the scene here, we've got a number of ambulances with personnel out front ready to receive the hostages. And then we have this cordon of other ambulances with their lights flashing. I mean, this is quite a dramatic picture here of the hostage return. Why is it, I mean, for all intents and purposes, this is staged by Israel this way. What's the reason for that?
Because for Israel, they have to show some upside. And so I know for them, you've got a right wing in Israel, a left wing in Israel, and Israel needs to show their people why they had so many, they had 1,200 people that were taken by Hamas as hostages or killed, and then you have 200 plus that were taken as hostages. Why are they even speaking with Hamas? And so for Israel, they need to show why they're doing that in the first place. This is why they're doing it, because they care about their people and they want innocent people back. But it's a hard decision, and that's why Israel is showing it's for their own people too.
Adam, if you would stand by with us, because there's a lot more ahead. Right now, let's go to our senior foreign affairs correspondent, Greg Palkot. He's in Tel Aviv with the latest on this. Greg, what are we expecting from this hostage release?
John, Sandra, yeah, as you've been noting and as you've been showing, it's an impressive picture. Lines of Red Cross ambulances ready to accept hostages being transported through what they call the Rafah crossing. That's the crossing between southern Gaza Strip into Egypt, and then it will go into Israel. So far, officially, the Israeli military has said there have been 2 dual nationals. Israeli Russians have been transferred, a mother and daughter combination. We could be looking at something like 12 in total tonight. We don't have that confirmed. We can't say that publicly. What we've been looking at too is more of women and children being transported from the grips of the Hamas terror group back into the safety of Israel. If that comes to be true, we could be looking at something like 72 freed from Gaza over the past 6 days, which is a good number, as well as other nationals, dual nationals, and foreigners that have been transported. This all part of a very, very careful negotiation that you have been talking about, I know, involving Israel, the United States, and third parties, go-betweens for the Hamas militants, including that ceasefire, a halt in fighting between Israel and Hamas for the past 6 days. And that is the next question as we continue to watch these ambulances which will be taking these individuals from this location to an air base nearby, and then up to hospitals in this area and other area. The question is whether there will be a continued cessation of fighting, which will allow the exchange of hostages. Both Israel and Hamas have agreed on one thing during this troubled time, and that is that they would like to see an extension, but Israel has been very clear. It wants to be sure that there will be more hostages given up before they decide to continue this break in their very, very strong war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, guys.
Yeah, well, and on that front, in terms of extending the ceasefire, we know that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, said today that he's going to Israel in the days ahead and would talk with Israeli leaders about potentially extending this pause even further than we've seen it so far. 6 days now, that about to come to an end, but I think it's probably likely that this pause will continue. Greg Palkot for us. Greg, thank you. Sandra?
Thank you, John. We are waiting to hear if more hostages will be released on the last day of that truce extension. Among those holding out hope is Abby Own. She's grieving the death of 2 relatives killed by Hamas last month, but 2 others were just released by Hamas. Meanwhile, 1 is still being held hostage today. Abby joins us now. Abby, welcome to you, and we are so sorry for everything that you and your family have been going through and are going through. Can you first give us an update on the 2 family members that were held hostage that have now been released? How are they doing?
Saha and Erez are with their mother and with their 2 older siblings, which for us has been what we've been fighting for. They came home very skinny, malnourished, with, dark circles under their eyes, and they need, the first thing they got was medical attention. They need to make sure that everything's okay. They weren't wounded, but they weren't fed, and so we need to make sure that, first and foremost that they were seen medically, but they're home and they're whole, physically at least.
Amen. Let's move on here for time's sake. Okay.
And of course, you're also seeing video coming out of the Gaza Strip of, again, every time that hostages have been transported by the Red Cross, crowds of Palestinians living in Gaza taunting them, yelling at them. Yesterday, there were reports that the Egyptian military had to intervene to make sure the hostages were not harmed when they were transferred. You had Hamas trying to protect them from these mobs to hold up their end of the hostage deal. That is something also that is being put into place here when it comes to the psychological warfare that we're seeing. This morning, the White House released a statement saying that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan had a meeting with the head of the Red Cross. They talked about putting more aid into Gaza and expressed that they wanted to highlight the fact that Hamas was still holding American hostages. As we've seen over the course of the past few days, 1 American has been released and Hamas is holding at least 2 more. That is something that...
It's a bad deal. It's a bad
all
deal.
themes that the former president signaled when he ran for office. So what I'm asking you, as somebody who is a close observer of our politics and our history, is why did it take you this long to see that this was dangerous, when there are a lot of people who said at the very beginning that this is not the leader of a liberal, diverse democracy?
I identified Trump as highly dangerous the minute he appeared on the scene, and I was writing about the importance of voting for Hillary Clinton to stop him. But I still objected to the notion that this was fascist, because all politicians run on nostalgia. What Trump has done in the past year has turned that into a really malevolent and violent movement. And I think particularly after January 6th, if I'm a little late to this usage, maybe January 6th was the time to start talking about it. But even January 6th was just such a chowder-headed rebellion of people that just wanted to trash government offices, that I don't think there was a coherence to it yet. And I think Trump now, after finally being turned out of office, I think Trump's rage and his narcissistic injury has finally led him to talk about his fellow citizens, rounding them up as vermin, rooting them out, expelling them. And that, he always had a nativist, nationalistic kind of approach. But he also, in 2016, he flip-flopped on issues basically depending on where he felt he needed to be in any given moment.
Exactly.
One thing I would point out in all this discussion about fascism, fascists tend to be pretty consistent. They tend to be workaholics, and they tend to be, like it or not, pretty brave people when it comes to the streets. And Trump is none of those things. But he's starting to build that movement around him and use that kind of rhetoric. And that's why I think it's time to start really waking up to the impact of that word.
vote for it would put his wife and new baby in danger. Does any of that surprise you, in spite of how maybe it should be shocking?
Well, you're right. It should be shocking, but it doesn't surprise me in this. I mean, what we've seen, and I give Liz Cheney a bunch of credit on this because she has called out what many of us have said is the worst of all of what we've seen in the last 5 or 6 years. And Donald Trump is who Donald Trump is, and we all know what kind of threat he is to democracy and the rule of law and all of that, and his life and the way he's led it in a fraudulent way. But really, what Liz Cheney says is what the biggest problem have been the enablers and the collaborators, like former Speaker McCarthy and like others, that have allowed Donald Trump to sort of poison our democracy in the course of this. And that's what I think of all of the things that Liz Cheney lays out, which is an incredible indictment, is the indictment that she has of the Republican Party in general, knowing what's best for the country and going along with what's worse for the country because they're worried either about election or they want to be close to power, is, I think, the most corrupt part of this.
Matthew Dowd, Sahil Kapoor, thank you guys. Appreciate it. And we will hear from Congresswoman Liz Cheney next Monday, December 4th, on The Rachel Maddow Show at
levels. I mean, in a way, to even have those arguments is to wade into this thicket of hallucinatory stuff where you're just arguing about things that aren't true. And so my response to all of that is to say, look, nothing's perfect. Country has problems. We can always do better. Is your solution to vote for a fascist?
Tom Nichols, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
And finally, some much needed straight up happy news to bring you. It is a boy, a 55-pound bouncing baby male Sumatran rhino born in Indonesia Saturday. The rhino calf, yet to be named, is the first delivery from a 7-year-old female named Delilah. He is a welcome addition to a critically endangered species. Currently, there are fewer than 50 living Sumatran rhinos. Encouragingly, he's the second calf born this year. Scientists say Delilah and son are healthy and doing exactly what they need to be doing: eating, resting, and bonding. And yes, you don't have to be a biblical scholar to suggest the name Samson. Well, that is it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye from New York.
Pill to treat plaque.
I'm active. My wife and I go to the gym. Looks like they got that.
All members voting? Any member wish to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 213, the nays are 205, one voted present. Previous question is ordered. The question is adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker,
Does what purpose from the gentlewoman from New Mexico rise?
I request a recorded vote, Mr. Speaker.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic post. This is a 5-minute vote.
So lawmakers are now voting on whether or not to approve the rules for debating 3 bills, including freezing $6 billion in Iranian hostage deal funds. Another measure prohibits federal funding to house undocumented immigrants on federal lands. And then the last measure would repeal a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau rule requiring banks to collect and report certain data on small business loan recipients. Now, also on the House agenda, members could take up a resolution as early as tomorrow to expel Republican member George Santos. Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia and Republican Congressman Anthony D'Esposito have introduced separate resolutions. And according to Jake Sherman of Punchbowl News, House Republican leaders are considering pushing the expulsion resolution vote to Friday and possibly starting debate as early as tomorrow. The Hill has this on that story. Speaker Mike Johnson said he has real reservations, quote unquote, about the push to expel Congressman Santos from Congress. Told members of the House Republican Conference today to vote their conscience when a resolution to oust the embattled lawmaker hits the floor this week. What we've said is the leadership team is we are going to allow people to vote their conscience. I think it's the only appropriate thing we can do. We've not whipped the vote, and we wouldn't. You can read the remainder of that story in The Hill today.
Okay.
By cross and then cross over.
And then the second part is obviously when Warren goes around after the business part, they ask questions. And the audience asks questions, and occasionally Warren would turn around. Charlie?
Okay.
Much higher price for the Israeli government in terms of the types of and the number perhaps of Palestinian prisoners that they will have to release from prisons. So a lot of efforts being made today. I was told earlier today by
anyone in the Middle East, but in the PR war, Sandra, and on social media, these moments live on for weeks or months and obviously help many with their re-election campaign. Back to you.
Interesting stuff. William Lajeunesse reporting from Los Angeles for us. Thank you. John?
Sandra, pressure growing on President Biden to curb his support for Israel, and more of that is coming from inside his own administration. We have covered protests from State Department employees, but now we're learning about federal officials who are posting personal opinions about the war on social media, some of them even mocking Israel. Jillian Turner is live at the State Department. And Jillian, one of those employees in question is an attorney for the Department of Veterans Affairs?
That's right, John. This female official over at the VA, an attorney, as you mentioned, posted a video on Instagram in which she adopts a fake accent and is openly appearing to mock Israelis pleading for the return of hostages. Take a listen to this short clip.
We just want our hostages back. Give us our 200 hostages.
Now, that official ultimately deleted the clip, but it was captured by a third-party source and reposted. Veterans Affairs tells Fox News, quote, "We're aware of this incident, are investigating the matter, and will take any appropriate action. There's no place at VA for anti-Semitism or any expression of bigotry or hatred." Now, separately, Fox News has confirmed that the CIA sent an internal warning to staff about social media posts in which they express political opinions. The move comes amid reports that a senior CIA officer posted a pro-Palestinian image onto social media. The CIA tells us, quote, "CIA officers are committed to analytic objectivity, which is at the core of what we do as an agency. CIA officers may have personal views, but this does not lessen their or CIA's commitment to unbiased analysis." Now, all this comes after a State Department internal dissent cable opposing Biden's support for Israel sparked government-wide criticism of both the president and the Secretary of State. Listen to this department spokesperson.
She did address in that email all the issues underlying our policy and made clear people understood what our policy is. We think that the diversity inside the department is actually a strength, not a weakness.
Now, we already know, as you mentioned, John, that opposition is fairly prevalent here at the State Department, also at the White House, opposition to the president's pro-Israel support in the ongoing Gaza war. But now it looks like it is also spilling over to the intelligence community and Veterans Affairs. John?
All right, well, we'll be watching to see what Secretary Dennis McDonough does, if anything, in regard to that one individual. Jillian Turner for us at the State Department. Jillian, thank you. Sandra?
All right, let's bring in Arkansas Republican Senator Tom Cotton. He's a member of the Select Committee on Intelligence. Senator, why don't you just weigh in on Jillian's report there?
Well, I think these reports are very troubling, especially the CIA officer. Why does a CIA officer have a social media page expressing political opinions of any kind? The CIA and the intelligence world in general is not supposed to make policy, and to post a flag of or post a picture of a Palestinian flag waving the day the Israeli Defense Forces goes into Gaza is not some innocent expression of sympathy with the Palestinian people. I mean, it's obviously expressing hope for their victory over the Israeli Defense Forces. It'd be akin, I would say, to having an intelligence officer in our Department of War on December 8, 1941, posting someone waving an imperial Japanese flag or a Nazi German flag after those countries had declared war on us, and vice versa. So these people should be, at a minimum, suspended and have their security clearances suspended until an investigation can decide exactly what should be done with them.
But to the degree that the agency had to remind staff then that it violates agency policy to post personal positions on social media, I mean, should we have senior officials, senior officers in the CIA that need to be reminded of that, Senator?
Well, it's unfortunate that we do. I mean, I've long thought that people who are in our intelligence agencies, and for that matter, our uniformed military, should not be on social media. They certainly shouldn't be posting political or policy viewpoints on social media. Maybe if they want to use it as a conduit to see the grandparents or the grandkids, that's one thing. But to have intelligence officers and military officers on social media expressing political and policy views, in my opinion, that runs contrary to their commitment to give nonpartisan, unbiased viewpoints and assessments to the policymakers, the people who are elected to make those decisions for the people of the United States. And that's just any kind of view at all. Even if I agree with it, certainly waving a Palestinian flag the day after, or the day that Israel's defense forces moved into Gaza to try to destroy terrorist savages like Hamas is beyond the pale.
I want to ask you now, obviously, as we have been focusing on this hostage release at this hour, as the war continues, there is a quote in the Washington Post on the Israel war creating divides inside the Biden White House. with this headline: White House grapples with internal divisions on Israel-Gaza. Senator, it reads, quote, "The Israel-Gaza war has roiled the administration more than any other issue in Biden's first 3 years in office." According to numerous aides and allies inside and outside the White House, as staffers agonize over their positions on highly emotional issues. Before I ask you how you support any conditions on further aid going over, what is your reaction to that? What are you hearing about this divide inside the West Wing?
Well, I think it's appalling that Democratic senators like Bernie Sanders are calling for conditions on our aid to Israel, as if Israel is some third world despotism abusing its own people. Israel is an elected democratic society that suffered the most savage attack against Jews since the Holocaust. And the divisions you see now in the Democratic Party is because Democratic leaders like Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer have allowed a growing anti-Semitic wing to rise in the Democratic Party. Chuck Schumer gave a big speech on anti-Semitism on the Senate floor today. That's great, but where's the action? He didn't call out Bernie Sanders by name for saying that we should condition aid to Israel.
Yeah.
They've looked the other way for years, while you had campus radicals who then went on to positions in their own offices in the Senate or in the administration of Barack Obama and Joe Biden saying that we should boycott Israel. And now all of those chickens are coming home to roost for the Democratic Party for allowing this growing anti-Semitic wing to fester in their party.
Just to be clear, this is where we caught up with some Democratic senators on whether or not there should be conditions on aid to Israel. Here was a few of the responses real quick.
Israel's an ally, a friend, so no.
I would oppose conditions that, in effect, straitjacket the Israeli government.
Well, there are conditions, of course, for anyone who receives military aid from the United States.
Just a real quick response to that, Senator, before we let you go.
Well, I'm pleased to hear some Democratic senators saying that we shouldn't condition aid to Israel as if it's a third world despotism. But more of them need to push back firmly against their actual colleagues. This is not some idea of campus radicals or intellectuals. It's their colleagues, people like Bernie Sanders. And they need to say that we should move on to pass the Israel aid bill that is on the Senate floor, that has already passed the House of Representatives, yet Chuck Schumer and every single Democrat voted not to send it to President Biden just 2 weeks ago.
Senator, appreciate you coming on today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
The average price of a home in America today is $416,000. How could we be living through worse cost of living and wages than 1930?
Young people flooding social media with negative talk about the economy, and it's not sitting well with the Biden administration. The White House is now turning to TikTok in an effort to change young voters' minds ahead of the 2024 election. But will that strategy work?
All right. Plus this, we are awaiting the release of the 6th group of hostages being held.
Good luck to all of us.
Scrambling.
Good luck to each and every one of us as we are approaching these perilous times. We have a government that wants to rule TikTok completely out of its existences here in the Western world, but now it wants to use it for a platform to be able to convince others of other matters. Hypocrisy after hypocrisy after hypocrisy. I've never seen nothing like it. Good luck to all of us, and shalom. God bless America. God bless our troops. And God bless our endeavors towards where we go from here.